Comrades, Presidium and comrades in the audience, I think I would start with some of the questions that have come here. Particularly the question of whether the Indian big bourgeoisie can be characterized as comprador, because it is also an industrial bourgeoisie, it is involved in industry. I have ended my paper with a statement: Bureaucrat capitalism remains, as Mao Zedong wrote, comprador, feudal, state monopoly capitalism. Now, whether that includes a bourgeoisie that is involved in industry, manufacture, etc. and all that, I think that's pretty obvious. And if it is not obvious, there are any number of studies about Mao's China, not the present India, Mao's China, which show how the big bourgeoisie of that country were involved in industry, in banking, in manufacture of all sorts of things, and had built up a huge, empire, which is exactly why Mao characterized it as state monopoly capitalism. Has this sort of usage, has anybody in the Marxist movement before Mao talked about a comprador feudal capitalism? I don't think so. So when Comrade Alok speaks about a bureaucrat feudals, it's quite possible. I mean, why shouldn't he? So I think, as Sanathan properly pointed out, we should not look at the question like that. It hasn't been said before by anybody and all that. Rather, the question is, does it describe what we see before us? Is it correct or not? On the basis of hard facts. It is on the basis of hard facts that the CPI movement came to the conclusion, CPI-ML came to the conclusion, that the Indian bourgeoisie is a comprador bourgeoisie. In those days, the fight was with the CPM, who had this formulation of a big bourgeoisie increasingly collaborating with imperialism. Neither here nor there. So if you raise the question of their ties with imperialism, then of course we said they were collaborating. But on the other hand, if somebody questioned them from the other side, they said, no, we didn't say it as a dependent bourgeoisie also. So they manufactured a formulation which would conveniently allow them to maneuver between all these questions and keep their provisionist position safe. Unfortunately, we are being forced to debate this question once again. Unfortunately, we have criticisms of Suniti Kumar Ghosh which is not at all based on any facts. I want you to note that. It's not based on any facts. Rather, it is based upon picking on this word or that word. That is not Marxism. That is not at all Marxism. It is mere rhetorics. You can get claps of hands. You can stir up your, sympathizers and supporters. Look, we have finally, in a most final manner settled the matter. You are not settling anything. Because Suniti Kumar Ghosh's work was based upon a solid analysis, research. He gave facts one after the other to show how the Indian bourgeoisie emerged as a trading class under the big bourgeoisie, emerged as a trading class under the colonial domination, and how step by step it went into industry. Not on its own violation, but also because of a push of the imperialist forces at that time. He gave the very clear example of how Tata established the iron and steel plant under the prompting of the British imperialists and with a capital donated by a feudal kingdom. That is fact. You cannot answer that fact or reject that fact by saying that a comprador cannot be an industrialist. He was a comprador, he was an industrialist also. So let us not waste time in debating the things that have been settled in the past. It is a useless business. And it is really sorry that pages upon pages are being written, huge volumes are written with this sort of nonsense. One has to use that word, nonsense. Because there is not a single fact in that whole argument going against the positions that were advanced at that time. And there are any number of studies that have come out after that on the historical conditions that existed here at the time of the entry of the East India Company, and also of how things developed later when the power was taken over by the British imperialists directly, the role they played in developing industry here according to their needs, how the contradictions among various factions of the British bourgeoisie created room for these compradors to enter industry, however they were aided by them. There are so many studies like that. I have quoted some in my paper. All those are based on research. They are not on semantic arguments quibbling about whether the word comprador includes industry or not. They are based on hard research. And that is what a serious student of Marxism should do. You should start with facts, you should analyze the facts and come to conclusions. You should disapprove a thesis or an argument based on facts, not on semantic quibbling. Here another issue has come up, some examples about this trade in oil and all that. What happened when Trump threatened to impose a penalty? What was the response of the spokesperson of the Indian Foreign Affairs Ministry? He said, we purchased oil from Russia after discussing with you and on the basis of your agreement with that. That was a statement made by the spokesperson of the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Modi's. Does that mean that they were going against American interests when they were buying oil from Russia? Not at all. It was done according to their understanding because they needed India to buy oil from Russia. If India did not buy oil, what would have happened? The supply of oil would have been restricted at the world level, that would have pushed up oil prices. So they wanted India to buy that oil at a discounted price. And where did that oil after refining go? It went to Europe. Didn't the European imperialists know that this oil is coming from Russia? That the crude oil is coming from there? Did Ambani do it in some secret way, pumping it below the sea or something that nobody saw it? No, it came with tankers. Everybody knew that it was coming. Everybody knew that was Russian crude oil was being refined in Ambani's factory in Gujarat and the Nayara factory, which is majority owned by the Russians. And that oil was being exported to Europe. Did America object at that time? No. They had asked India to do it. So this idea, look, now Modi is standing up against Trump and saying we'll do whatever we want. Of course he is blustering. Because they have to bargain, they want to push their, somehow get some better deal. And why is it, it's quite possible that India might continue to purchase oil from Russia despite tariffs imposed by America. Why? Because possibly there is a question of the European interest, the question of the European imperialists. They have contradictions with American imperialism. So it's quite possible that they will say, no, you go ahead, we'll take care of you. They might push through a foreign trade, a free trade association or whatever agreement to balance the problems caused by the problems that could be faced by Indian exporters in America to the US. All sorts of things are possible. Being a comprador does not mean a totally subjugated, and that is the point about semi-colonialism. India is not dominated by any single imperialist country. It is a semi-colony, and therefore there is a contradiction among various imperialist powers. And the Indian ruling classes has always tried to maneuver, and they are able to maneuver to some extent because it is a big country. They have a large economy here, there is a big internal market here, and therefore they have a geostrategic importance which means that other imperialist powers also need them for various things. So all these things go to their advantage also. But there is a limit to that. They can never go against the imperialist system. They can have a trade with this one or adjustment with the other one, but never against the imperialist system as a whole. So we should not be misguided by these appearances, by newspaper headlines. Go into the essence, look what's happening below, what is actuality. And then you can come to some understanding what is really happening in this world. In my paper, I have tried to focus on that aspect. When I explained, I'm not going into the details of the paper, it's there with you. For example, this whole question of tenancy, this argument about ground rent and capitalist ground rent or feudal ground rent and all that. I have given examples on the basis of social investigation carried out in Kerala of various types of tenancy. All three types of tenancy exist in Kerala today, where the land reforms have been carried out in a comparatively more thorough manner than any other state in India. You have labor rent, where the rent is paid by labor. You have rent in kind, where a share of the produce is given as rent. You have rent in cash, where the price is, the rent is fixed in cash beforehand. And you also have sharecropping, where the owner of the land sometimes gives a part of the inputs and sometimes doesn't. And the rate of exploitation comes at certain cases up to 70%. In a recent case where I investigated, a young farmer who is doing agricultural operations on about 50 acres of land, out of which 10 is owned by him and his family members, and the rest is taken on rent. And he was saying that his operation is almost completely mechanized, including transplanting, everything is mechanized, except for a few things like repairing the bund and all that. And he was saying that the income that he is getting out of this 50 acres is sufficient for maintaining a middle class life. That's what he was saying. Standard of living is particularly high in Kerala. So when he says that he is maintaining a middle class life, he does not mean a lower middle class or anything, an upper middle class life. Like a fairly rich Gulf fraternity or something. But it's interesting, he is speaking about maintaining a certain standard of life. He is not speaking about the self-expansion of capital that the comrade was mentioning here. He is not able to generate sufficient surplus for the self-expansion of the capital that he has invested. Another case that I mentioned it here in the paper, a person who is doing 10 acres of land on tenancy as tenants. He's taken the land on rent and is doing agricultural operations. So he's saying that it is not a profitable business. He's got other work. He's got a shop. He's running a shop. He has also got a rental business and various other businesses. So then I asked him, then why are you doing this? And he said it is very important for social value. The fact that I have 10 acres of land on tenancy and I'm doing agriculture there gives me a certain social standing in society. Isn't that interesting? That this person is attaching social standing to doing agricultural activity on 10 acres of rented land, not his own land, mind you. When he is already involved in a business, he's already got a shop, he is already doing some rental business, yet social value he sees in that. What does that indicate? Does that indicate a capitalist way of thinking? So you have to, and all his operations are again mechanized. So you have to go beyond these things that we see apparently before us and go to them. What is the logic operating there? Is it a capitalist logic? The self-expansion the comrade was speaking about, of accumulation and going bigger and bigger like that? Or is it a feudal logic, where value is attached to certain other things, not actually the collateral or the asset or the value of the asset or anything? So when we speak about semi-feudalism today, we have to understand it in this complexity. No, it is not the old type of semi-feudalism, but then what is this old type of semi-feudalism? Was it ever there something like that? I have gone through a recent study in Kerala, a PhD thesis about the right-wali system in northern Kerala under the British. Interestingly, It says that, just a minute, the 1856 mind you, census carried out in the Malabar district of the East India Company, colonial possessions, noted that 25% of the population was not dependent on agricultural income. That is 1856. Already 25% of the population of Malabar district is not dependent on agriculture. The 1871 census recorded that 25% of the population were wage laborers. So when you speak about, so what is this? Is that feudalism? There were extreme forms of feudal exploitation of those days. You might have heard about the Malabar Rebellion, present rebellion that took place in 1921, precisely because of the intense feudal exploitation, also known as the Moplar Rebellion and all that. So feudalism was there very much, but it was not that old feudalism. In fact, the old feudalism, the feudal lords, as in Bengal also, the feudal lords did not have total control over the tenants. They could not remove them from the land like as they wished. They had to respect certain norms and all that. That was imposed after the British took control, where the landlord was given total rights. You could do anything with the tenants. And that actually intensified the feudal exploitation. On the one hand, there was tremendous ruin. Huge number of peasant farmers were forced to become agricultural laborers and landless people. On the other hand, there was intensification of exploitation, which ultimately led up to that rebellion and all that. So, but the point I'm saying is that when you speak about the semi-feudalism, that was also semi-feudalism. The moment the British entered, the British colonialists started entering the rural areas, from that time onwards, the feudal relations started getting transformed. Not only that, in India, unlike many other third world oppressed countries, even before the British came, even before the colonial domination took place here, already changes had started taking place. Like for example, in Mysore under the Tipu and Hyder, which was recorded in Saki's book on the history of Karnataka, the big changes that took place in agricultural relations, the growth of certain industries and all that. Same thing happened in Travancore also, to some extent. Not to the same extent, to some extent it happened in Travancore also. Well before the British could establish their political control. So already these changes had started taking place. Once they entered, then that intensified. Because once the rent started being demanded in money, then naturally for everybody, increasing of the monetary income becomes important. So naturally that starts a process of monetization of the economy. The transformation takes place accordingly in feudal values and relations, relations and all that. So this process is going on from then on. And today it takes new forms, as I mentioned earlier. It is not apparent, everything is there. There is mechanization, there is implementation of capital. So we ask the question, is it capitalist ground rent? I would say no, it is not capitalist ground rent. Because ultimately that rent is not going into the generation of capital, the self-expansion of capital. It is going into subsistence. That is what is most determining there. There is another case where I noticed, for example, Marx talks about differential rent. Now, what is differential rent? Differential rent is where the land is more productive and gives more produce than compared to other areas. So there is a difference about the rent that is given to the other areas, and here landlord can demand a higher rent in the more productive areas. In my investigation in Kerala, I noticed that in areas where the productivity is higher, the rent is lower. Exactly opposite than what it should be. Why is that happening? It is happening because in that specific area there is not much demand for land on leased land. Why? Because the broad population there, the landless and poor peasants there, they have various other occupations. So they are not interested in taking land on rent and doing agriculture. The demand for land is less, and therefore the rent is also less. But in another area, which is not at all productive compared to this place. There is extreme problem in getting water in time and all that. Rents are very high. Why? Because there the local population does not have much of other occupations. So naturally they have to look for something. They turn to the first thing, that is land. Do some agricultural activity and get some income from that. The demand for leased land is higher there, and therefore the rent is higher there. So what is the logic operating there? Is it the logic of a capitalist agrarian system where we have equalized average profit? No, it is not. It is extremely localized. And it is extremely localized precisely because the whole economy is semi-feudal. So this, what I am saying is that when you speak about semi-colonial, semi-feudal and all that, don't think of it in the old framework of what was existing in China or what was existing in the 60s and all. It has changed. For example, what is happening in Punjab today, extremely mechanized, all that true. That example of the tractor and all that the comrade gave, it was something that was done in Rajini exercise, done a study in Punjab, and they pointed out something. That even a peasant who owns only 1 or 2 acres of land is purchasing a tractor. Now, what would be the productive value of that investment? What is he going to do with 1 and 2 acres and a tractor? Obviously, that purchase of the tractor is associated with certain other things. He might be using it for transportation, it might be using it as a matter of social prestige. Everybody has a tractor, so I too should have a tractor. Or somebody might have come with offer of a loan. Don't worry, you can pay 1,000 rupees per month and have a tractor now. Anyway, it is not driven by the logic of capital, where you think about the investment and the returns you are going to get of it, and then you invest something. So don't look at the things from a superficial thing. Is there machinery, is there this, is there wage labor, etc., is there commodity production? Go into the essence and try to understand that. So this, I think, is the point that we have to understand when we discuss about this mode of production. Precisely, I think that is best captured by understanding the matter of bureaucrat capitalism more deeply, and that is why I have specifically put that as the topic of my paper. The paper is before you, and I guess 20 minutes over.
20 minutes over.
I think so. So I think I will conclude now and respond to questions as they come up. I have not gone into all the details of the paper, it is all before you. But essentially the point is that don't get trapped in appearances, go beyond that and get into the essence. Thank you.